Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Krishna Krishna, Hare Rama Rama, Hare Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama. Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama. Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Jam Vishnupad Param Sivaraj Kachara Shtotar Shattas Divine Grace of Aichan the Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jam Vishnupad Param Sivaraj Kachara Shtotar Shattas Divine Grace Bhaktivedanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Krantara Chima Bhagavatam Ki Jai Nitya Gaura Parimanande Hari Hari Bol. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Hare Krishna, today we are reading Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 6, Text 22. Yasmarandam virachakye, Yasmarandam virachakye, Yasmarandam virachakye, Bhutendriya gunatmakaha, Bhutendriya gunatmakaha, Tatravyamatigad Vishwam, Tatravyamatigad Vishwam, Kopi Suryaiva Tapan, Kopi Suryaiva Tapan, Yasmarandam Virachakye, Bhutendriya Gunatmakaha, Tadravyam Atyagad Vishwam, Kopi Suryaiva Tapan, Yasmarandam Virachakya, Bhutendriya Gunatmakaha, Tadravyam Atyagad Vishwam, Kopi Suryaiva Tapan, Yasmad, from whom, Andam, the universal globes, Virat, and the gigantic universal form, Chakya, appeared, Bhuta, elements, Indriya, senses, Guna Atmakaha, qualitative, Tatravyam, the universes and the universal form, etc. Atyagad, surpassed, Vishwam, all the universes, Kopihi, by the rays, Suryaha, the sun, Eva, like, Atapan, distributed rays and heat. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace of Aichan Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. From that personality of Godhead, all the universal globes and the universal form with all material elements, qualities and senses are generated. Yet he is aloof from such material manifestations, like the sun, which is separate from its rays and heat. Purport. The Supreme Truth has been ascertained in the previous verse as Purusha or the Purushottama, the Supreme Person. The Absolute Person is the Isvara or the Supreme Controller by his different energies. The Ekapad Vibhuti manifestation of the material energy of the Lord is just like one of the many mistresses of the Lord, by whom the Lord is not so much attracted, as indicated in the language of the Gita, Pinna Prakriti. But the region of the Tripad Vibhuti, being a pure spiritual manifestation of the energy of the Lord, is, so to speak, more attractive to him. The Lord therefore generates the material manifestations by impregnating the material energy, and then within the manifestation he expands himself as the gigantic form of the Vishvarupa. The Vishvarupa, as it was shown to Arjuna, is not the original form of the Lord. The original form of the Lord is the transcendental form of Purushottama or Krishna himself. It is very nicely explained herein that he expands himself just like the sun. The sun expands itself by its terrible heat and rays, yet the sun is always aloof from such rays and heat. The impersonalist takes into consideration the rays of the Lord without any information of the tangible, transcendental, eternal form of the Lord, known as Krishna. Therefore, Krishna in his supreme personal form, with 2 hands and flute, is bewildering for the impersonalists who can accommodate only the gigantic Vishvarupa of the Lord. They should know that the rays of the sun are secondary to the sun, and similarly, the impersonal gigantic form of the Lord is also secondary to the personal form as Purushottama. The Brahma Samhita 5.37 confirms this statement as follows: Ananda chinmaya rasa pratibhavitabis tabirya eva nicharupataya kalabhi koloka eva nivasatya kilatma puto govindamadi purusham tamha bachami. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, Govinda, the one who enlivens the senses of everyone by his personal bodily rays, resides in his transcendental abode called Koloka. Yet he is present in every nook and corner of his creation by expansion of happy spiritual rays equal in power to his personal potency of bliss. He is therefore simultaneously personal and impersonal by his inconceivable potency. Or he is the one without a second, displaying complete unity in a diversity of material and spiritual manifestations. He is separate from everything, and still nothing is different from him. Om Knyanativirandasya Knananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Uta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrachatam Sahagana Raghunathan Vitam Tam Sachivam Sadvaitam Savarutam Parichana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandha Jagatpate Kopesha Kopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhana Sute Devi Pranamame Hare Priya Vancha Kalpadarabhishta Kripasanibhaya Vacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Gaura Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. Thank you for coming or watching on Mayapur TV to Srimad Bhagavatam class. So we just finishing today the section as we learned from the Bhagavad Subodhini, that this section from verse 18 to 22 is called Ekapad Vibhuti versus Tripad Vibhuti. So in other words, we heard in those different verses how the Lord, like the opulence of the material world, as being just a fragment of that of the spiritual world, and I was thinking in today's verse, like it is concluded with telling that He, the Lord Himself, as the personality of Godhead, as Sri Krishna Himself, He is aloof from all of that. And that's in one sense similar as Krishna in Bhagavad Gita, also in 10th chapter, tells about they're only about the material opulences as being representations of His opulences to help us to relate to Him, even seeing the material things, not being able to perceive spirit in our state of consciousness. So there also then he concludes by, not also, but similarly in one way, by saying that even though now I told you all those different things, but actually that's simply a spark of my splendor, like the two famous verses it tells there Yad yad vibhutimat sattvam shrimadu chatimevata tattattiva vagachatam mamatichum sambhavam. So whatever beautiful, glorious, beautiful, glorious, or opulent manifestations you see, just simply mamatichum sambhavam, just simply born out of a fraction of mine, simply amsha. And then in the next verse he concludes with Atava bahunatina kim hyatina tavachumya vishtabhyamidam kritsam ekam shanastito chagat, telling Arjuna that what need is there to tell all these opulences when simply by a single fragment of myself I pervade and sustain all these opulences, all the universe, which refers to his being the supersoul. And because simply by the supersoul he pervades everything, being even in every single atom, as well as every living being, in the heart of every living being, and in that way enabling material life. But this supersoul, as we know, it's like a expansion of an expansion of an expansion. You can trace up all the way to Krishna, like Balaram, and all the Chaturvyu and Narayan, all the Purusha avatars, and at the end, the Supersoul we know is personally residing. He's also as Kshirotakashaya Vishnu, Shvetadvip. So, but still, of course, still full with all the potencies, and it is by this Supersoul that we that material life is possible. And but so here today he concludes with or in today's verse this section is concluded as showing again that actually Bhagavan is obviously supreme, because it is he who is aloof, he from the personality from whom everything simply emanates, and still doesn't affect him in any way. He's still transcendental to all of that, and eternally situated as the supreme enjoyer in the spiritual world. And which shows this aloofness obviously is how we understand that. That's our famous Achintya Veda Veda Tattva philosophy, which Krishna also explains in himself in Bhagavad Gita, famous verses in 9th chapter, 9, 4 and 5, where he first in the 4th verse that's like a very compacted verse, you can say, because it explains in the first 2 lines his manifestation as Brahman, pervading everything, sustaining everything in the material world, and then the 3rd line to him as the Supersoul, and then the last line as him still being aloof from that as Bhagavan. So it goes that Maya tatam idam sarvam jagata vyaktamurtina matstani sarvabhutani nachaham deshu vastitaha. So in his impersonal feature, he's simply there as avyaktamurtina, as the unmanifest form, not visible by our eyes. And matstani sarvabhutani, so everyone is situated in him, simply supported by the Supersoul. And of course, but he himself, nachaham teshu vastitaha, but personally he's not in any of that. In other words, he's still aloof. And then, which he further explains then in the next verse, in the 5th verse, with nachamatstani bhutani pashyame yogamashvaram bhuta brinnacha bhutasto mamatma bhuta bhavanaha. That's also such a beautiful verse where he tells Arjuna that because in the previous verse it says Matstani Sarvabhutani, him referring to him as being the Supersoul, that everyone is situated in him. In other words, everything depends directly on the Supersoul, but then he sells still actually Najamatstani Bhutani. Actually, I'm not within. Najamatstani Bhutani. Yeah, I'm not situated within all the living entities. Behold my mystic opulence, Pashamego Yogameshwaram. And then further he explains that even though I'm the maintainer of everything, Bhutabrit, I'm not situated in the whole material world. It's maintained by me, but I'm not in there. Not Bhutabrit Naja Bhutasta. And how is that to understand? That he gives the explanation as well in the same verse, that Mamatma Bhuta Bhavanaha, because my Atma, my very self is the source of all this creation. And yeah, it's actually very simple, profound, amazing verse, explaining in one verse this Achintya Bheda Bheda Tattva. And and of course in Bhagavatam itself also, in a few chapters later, in 9th chapter, then the Lord explains to Lord Brahma the famous Chatushloki there, where the third verse of those also similarly explains the same, namely, Yatha mahanti bhutani bhuteshu cha vacheshu no pravishtani apravishtani tatadeshu nateshvaham. So the analogy he gives there is that of the material elements, that all the, first let me try to say the translation. So as the material elements are, somewhat like as the material elements are in the bodies of all living beings, but yet remain outside them all. Similarly, I exist within all material creations, and yet I'm not within them. So again, I exist within all material creations, which means all the material creation is only possible to exist by Him, by the Lord's presence. But at the same time, I'm not within them. So at the same time, you can't say like we are within this room. So someone can, if someone tells, hey, he's there, so someone can come and can catch us or whatever, like we are contained here. Whereas for the Lord, it's not like that. All of that is coming from Him, emanating from Him, and under His supervision running. But at the same, still He's completely aloof in Golok Vrindavan, and innumerable other places, of course, that He expands to, incarnates and everything. So yeah, that is the Lord's opulence. And yeah, the example given in this verse is with the gross material elements, that they, like all our material bodies, obviously are made of those elements: earth, water, fire, air, ether. But at the same time, it's not like that. If you look at one body, so that's where the elements are, and they're nowhere else. No, they're still there everywhere. And like even in one way to further understand it is also they are not only in all the bodies of the living beings and all the planets and everything, but then if you think about the structure of the universe, we know that then even the universe has those coverings, so where every single element is a whole huge covering made out of that element. So they exist there as well, for example. So, and they don't get affected by what's happening with the transformations with the elements here in all those different bodies and manifestations. So yeah, but that's just a gross example, of course, to help us understand a little bit of the unlimited opulence of the Lord. And and what I mentioned kind of in a previous class already is that with this Ekapad Vibhuti, the material world, we know it's like in today's purport, Prabhupada mentioned that the material nature, she's not his favorite mistress. like we know, Parvati, she's also, or Durga Devi. There's also a personality behind controlling material nature, but Prabhupada says that, where is it? Yeah, so it's just like one of the, the Ekapad Vibhuti manifestation of the material energy of the Lord is just like one of the many mistresses of the Lord, by whom the Lord is not so much attracted, as indicated in the language of the Gita, Binna Prakriti. So referring to the 7th chapter where Krishna explains the inferior energy as being all those elements, like I just mentioned, being Binna Prakriti, so being his separated energy, which indicates, like Prabhupada explains here, that he's not so much attracted by that, because if he's attracted to something, then you don't keep it separate. Of course, we know, like, as from this Achinta Veda Veda Tattva also, that in fact nothing is separate from the Lord, but still he's not personally present. He's still aloof, as we explained. So in that way, from his personality, it is separate. And that indicates that, he cares more about the Tripad Vibhuti, of course, the spiritual manifestation. And so, as we said, it's this Ekapad Vibhuti, he manifests simply out of his love for all the living entities, out of which some, like us, misuse the free will to try to be separate, independent, and joyous and control us. And and this similarly, just as a loving parent doesn't like by himself, he doesn't like to buy for the child some things which he knows are not beneficial for him, like, let's say, some computer games or like gadgets like that, or some unhealthy, like junk food or whatever, unhealthy things. And yet, because the children many times are so caught up in just being completely convinced that I need that, otherwise I can't be happy, and so unless I don't get it, I just make trouble. So that's why the parents still, even though they don't like to do, out of love for the child, they still buy that or give that. And so, similarly, the Lord, he doesn't like to create and then send us into this prison house of the material world, but it's simply by our misuse of independence that he still does so, and does so in such an amazing way, as we heard, like yesterday, we heard about Kshetranya, about the super soul, especially, that we are just this tiny Kshetranya, conscious of our own material body, whereas Krishna, as the super soul, is conscious of everyone and everything, and in that way enables us to life after life travel through all those different kshetras, different fields of activities to live out our different desires due to our association with material nature. And so in terms of, like mentioned last time, in terms of the opulence of the contrast of material world with the spiritual world, that, like Vanaswami explained, that actually you can't compare it, obviously, because it's spiritual material is completely different. Like, you can't measure anything in the spiritual world with our material means, and so it's this tripad and ekapad is simply to give us some indication. And so and one of those indications, like I mentioned, is that we hear that that also then within the spiritual world, that the whole Vaikuntha planets, where we know which are also unlimited in number, where there's all the unlimited forms of Vishnu, including, like we know, all this forms that he incarnates as well, the famous ones that we hear in Bhagavatam, like Varahadev, Matsyavatar, Kurma, and all those that, and even like Pritha Maharaj, we hear also, he also has his own planet. So they all have their own planets with innumerable devotees serving them there. And still, all of this opulence of Vaikuntha is compared to coming simply from a particle of dust of Golok Vrindavan, the topmost portion of the spiritual realm. And we know that even there's still also then Dwarka, the first Mathura Dwarka, and also Ayodhya with Lord Ramchandra, so the spiritual world. It's obviously, it's unlimited, but to give us some idea, we hear those things, and in that reminded me of this dust of Vrindavan, because like we hear otherwise from the pastimes that obviously in Vrindavan, how the day goes usually that Krishna in the morning he goes out with his cart boys into the forest to herd the calves, and as apparently, but basically just play, and so all the other Rajabasis are like transcendentally suffering like anything the whole day, can't await Krishna's coming back, and so the indication that they look for to see Krishna's return is mainly this dust of being by the running of the calves, of the cows, the dust being thrown out into the air, making dust clouds, and that's how they like sometimes stand up on the roofs of tops and look towards the forest path, looking out for this dust cloud. And so but coming now to the contrast of like that there the dust which cloud which obviously actually impedes the direct vision of Krishna, but actually there it helps for them to then see Krishna, and it increases their anticipation and everything. And even it's explained, I remember from one purport in, I'm not sure, Bhagavatam or CC, that like for the gopis, when they, for them it doesn't actually cloud their vision for Krishna. In one sense it does, of course, but because they are so extremely attached to Krishna, even when there's the dust cloud between them, they still can fully understand the movements of Krishna. That's how it's explained there. Because when you're completely one in desire with Krishna, then there's this natural understanding, and so for them even a dust cloud cannot impede their vision in that way. Whereas the sharp contrast to the material world is where that's nicely explained also by Krishna himself in that 7th chapter as well, I think, famous verse, where Prabhupada, the first line he quotes so many times of also showing Krishna as the personality being, the supreme. So, which goes that Mataha Parataram Nan Yat Kinchidasthidanan Chaya Mayi Sarvam Midam Protam Sutre Manikana Iva. So that nothing Mata Parataram Nan Yat, so nothing exists beyond me. But then the second part of the verse comes to that Mayi Sarvam Midam Protam Sutre Manikana Iva, that everything rests on me just like pearls are strung on a thread. And this analogy explains how that, because if you look at a perfect necklace, or we're made of pearls, then you see only the pearls, you don't see the thread. And But without the thread, there is no necklace. The pearls would just fall anywhere. So this explains that Krishna's congenial presence in the material world of enabling the whole existence, all the life, but at the same time enabling like the purpose for which he created it, at least to one degree. I mean, ultimately he created the material world simply for the jivas to come back to him again, but to first being able to rectify the wrong mentality of wanting to lord it over the material world, they need to have this facility of seeing everything as separate from Krishna, as being without Krishna, in fact. It's so much so that we, conditioned souls, even though everything is simply made by Krishna and pervaded by him, that we completely are able to completely forget him and to come up with all those crazy atheistic ideas of explaining the material world. So in terms of his impersonal manifestation, and then also on top of that, of course, we know he's right next to us in our heart as the supersoul of every single living being, and still we can't see him. So this shows the amazing potency of simply his inferior energy of Maya, of enabling the living entity to see the world without Krishna. And so whereas in the spiritual world, there are even things which apparently cloud the vision of Krishna, simply enhance the devotion and attachment to Krishna. And so, and obviously, as we know, that this material world and this material energy is still insignificant compared to his spiritual energy, and so can give us just some idea of how it will be if we come back under the shelter of Yoga Maya, of his spiritual energy, and like how amazing it must be when you purely interact on that platform with the Lord. And another point, I was thinking in terms of especially in Bhagavad Gita, obviously, many times we hear Krishna telling us directly that surrender unto me, or give everything up, and dedicate everything to me. So he's directly telling like that, where when we don't understand the philosophy properly and his mercy, then it sounds like, is he like bragging around, or like why is he telling like that? But of course, that's as we hear that and know that he, as the personality, as Bhagavan, is the supreme, is superior to even Paramatma and Brahman. So it simply is foolish not like to surrender to anything else other than him as the personality, especially as Sri Krishna himself. And one example for that is where he tells when, like, His Grace Achyuta Kesava Prabhu recently, in his class, he mentioned, he had also in one sense a similar verse like today, where also the example of the sun was given, pervading everything but still being aloof. That for the impersonalists, it's Krishna tells in Bhagavad Gita 12th chapter, I think 12.5, how it is always troublesome for them while doing it, and after, when they want to become devotees as well, because then they are attached to this idea, and it's hard for them to take up to the personalism. Verse 4, and then in the next two verses he immediately gives the contrast to how it is if you personally surrender to him. Namely, he tells, ye two, so two, but ye, those who says Suyetu Sarvani Karmani Mai Sanyasamat Paraha Ananyanava Yogana Mam Tayanto Pasate Tishamaham Samudarta Niti Mrityu Samsara Sakarat Bhavamina Chirat Parta Maya Vichita Chetasam. So there Krishna tells, but those who dedicate all the work unto me, who engage in pure unalloyed devotional service, always meditating upon me, to them I become the personally, I like he demands, give it up unto me, but then also I personally take them out of this circle of birth and death, mrityu samsara sagarat, and when he says bhavami nachirat parta, without delay, immediately I do that, and yeah, so maya vichita chetasam, and thus they are completely sheltered, fixed in me with their consciousness. So yeah, Krishna, he doesn't just demand, obviously he also promises and also shows that we hear in so many examples how amazing he does take care of the devotees. And yeah, and now just to conclude, in terms of when we hear of the spiritual world, of the sweetness of Krishna, especially and in contrast to the material miseries, we may feel like, oh, it would be so nice, I wish I would be there, not having to go through this sadhana bhakti here, struggling. Which, in one sense, of course, yeah, it's natural, it's good that we desire to go back there. But at the same time, at least for someone like me in a lower stage of consciousness, if we feel like that, then mostly that will be based still on sense gratification, actually. That we don't want to struggle for Krishna, but we just want to enjoy, just there, no anxieties, just being nicely situated there. But of course we know, Srila Prabhupada, so many times he hits on the point that Vrindavan is a state of consciousness, so it's not that we just wish, okay, I wish I would be there in the spiritual world. Rather, no matter pure devotees, no matter where they are in ecstatic love, united with Krishna, as of course most famous examples of the gopis who are ready to even go to hell perpetually just to relieve Krishna for a moment's pain. And as everyone knows the story with Narad Muni approaching the different devotees, and then only the gopis being ready to give their dust of their feet if it can alleviate Krishna's pain. And also Advaita Acharya as well tells to Mahaprabhu that where you are, there is Vrindavan. So where the pure devotees are in ecstatic love, that is surcharged with the atmosphere of being ready to sacrifice anything for Krishna's pleasure and not waste a single moment to worry about our happiness. And that's obviously how we are most happy, as exhibited by those great devotees. And Srila Prabhupada himself, obviously, he left Vrindavan to take up so much trouble to give us what we have now. Okay, so thank you for your attention. Kantarachima Bhagavatam Ki Jaya.